It began with a sweet poison, not in a laboratory or a manufacturing facility, but in a field of shimmering grass in New Guinea over 8,000 years ago. The first sugarcane was chewed like nectar by ancient hands, its fibers releasing a natural sweetness that seemed harmless, innocent. But as centuries unfolded, that same unassuming plant would seduce entire empires, fund the brutal machinery of slavery, and rewire the human brain in ways no one could have foreseen. The crystalline substance extracted from those tall grasses wasn't merely food. It evolved into something far more insidious, an obsession that gripped civilizations, an addiction that altered behaviors, a commodity that transformed into raw power. And while humanity celebrated its sweetness, sugar quietly began to alter something far more delicate than waistlines or dental health. It methodically infiltrated our minds, creating pathways of pleasure and craving that would fundamentally change our relationship with food forever. By the 7th century, sugar had begun its westward journey from India to Persia, where it was poetically called reeds that make honey without bees. It arrived in the Arab world not as common food, but as precious medicine, dispensed with reverent care in glimmering apothecaries, where healers prescribed it for ailments of the body and spirit. But sweetness is a temptation that rarely stays contained within medicinal boundaries. Arab conquerors carried the crystalline treasure across their expanding empire, weaving it into the culinary tapestry of North Africa and embedding it in the splendors of Moorish Spain. The scent of sugar eventually reached European nobility, arriving like a seductive whisper among the upper classes, a luxury reserved for kings and queens, a symbol of wealth and power displayed in ornate sugar sculptures at royal banquets. Yet beneath its glistening facade, a more sinister narrative was taking root. This was no longer just an agricultural crop or a healing substance. It was transforming into a currency that would reshape global economies. And wherever sugar planted its roots, blood inevitably followed, staining soil and soul alike. From the sugar plantations of Madeira to the Caribbean, entire colonies would be carved out in its name, native populations displaced, and new systems of brutal exploitation established. Behind every delicate spoonful that sweetened the lips of European aristocracy, there was a darker cost waiting to surface, a human price paid in sweat, tears, and shattered lives. By the 18th century, sugar had completed its stunning transformation from a precious rarity to a common necessity, infiltrating the kitchens and lives of ordinary people throughout Europe. This democratization of sweetness, however, concealed a more disturbing phenomenon, one that would reshape human consciousness itself, the mass conditioning of desire on an unprecedented scale. Sugar became the invisible architect of taste, methodically incorporated into preserves, beverages, and confections that saturated urban markets and rural homesteads alike. The seemingly innocent crystals rewrote culinary traditions and family recipes, their power hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, on sprawling Caribbean plantations that stretched beyond the horizon, tens of thousands of enslaved Africans toiled under merciless tropical heat, their bodies breaking against the relentless machinery of production. Blood, sweat, and tears seeped into every granule of sugar exported to European ports, an invisible suffering that consumers never tasted. In the drawing rooms of London and the cafes of Paris, rosy-cheeked children learned their first and most enduring lesson: that sweetness equaled love, celebration, and emotional fulfillment. With each birthday cake and holiday treat, a profound neurological conditioning took root, as sugar triggered cascades of dopamine so powerful they rivaled the effects of addictive substances. The human brain, never evolved to process such concentrated sweetness, surrendered to these artificial pleasures without resistance. Scientists would not uncover these neurological mechanisms for generations, but the damage was already done, the neural pathways established with disturbing permanence. A global dependency had silently emerged, one that would soon transcend mere consumption to become enmeshed in cultural identity, economic policy, and eventually, medical crisis. As sugar infiltrated breakfast tables and evening desserts, it reshaped not just diets but desires themselves, creating cravings that could never truly be satisfied. The terrifying reality was not simply that sugar had become commonplace, but that humanity had become fundamentally altered by its presence. Our very perception of pleasure and satisfaction recalibrated around a substance that offered fleeting joy while demanding ever more of itself. The early 20th century, sugar had become the invisible king of the modern diet, reigning supreme yet unseen across American tables and European kitchens alike. Industrial advances transformed this once luxury item into an omnipresent additive, with gleaming factories producing it in quantities our ancestors could never have imagined. Food manufacturers discovered they could lace sugar into nearly every processed good, from wholesome-looking bread to innocent-seeming ketchup, without resistance or question from consumers who remained blissfully unaware of its pervasive presence. Its crystalline fingerprints touched everything, while leaving no visible trace, camouflaged behind clever scientific nomenclature like dextrose, maltose, and high-fructose corn syrup, hidden beneath cheerful packaging, adorned with smiling children, and vibrant colors that promised health and vitality. But its impact was neither cheerful nor benign, leaving a shadow much darker than its sweet taste suggested. In medical offices across industrialized nations, puzzled physicians began charting strange correlations they couldn't initially explain. Alarming rises in obesity rates that defied previous patterns, unprecedented cases of early-onset diabetes in adolescents, and even children, and mysterious mood disorders that seem to oscillate with dietary patterns. In university laboratories, researchers observed laboratory animals displaying addiction-like behaviors when given sugar water, pressing levers compulsively for another sweet fix, their little bodies trembling with anticipation. Behind the mahogany doors of corporate boardrooms, something far more sinister was unfolding in hushed tones and confidential memos. According to once secret industry documents released decades later through litigation and whistleblower testimony, sugar industry executives orchestrated a masterful campaign of scientific manipulation beginning in the 1960s. Industry-funded researchers deliberately suppressed mounting studies linking sugar consumption to heart disease and metabolic dysfunction, methodically deflecting blame onto dietary fats instead. The Sugar Research Foundation, later renamed to obscure its industry ties, paid Harvard scientists the equivalent of nearly $50,000 modern dollars to publish influential reviews, minimizing sugar's health risks while vilifying fat, shaping nutritional dogma for generations. Medical journals, government dietary guidelines, and public health campaigns all unwittingly became vehicles for this carefully crafted misinformation, altering the course of nutritional science for half a century. The public's trust was not just manipulated, but weaponized against them, as policy decisions guided by this corrupted research redirected scrutiny away from sugar's devastating health impacts. Meanwhile, in suburban homes across America, and increasingly throughout the developing world, families unknowingly filled their pantries with sugar-laden breakfast cereals marketed specifically to children, fizzy sodas that contained 10 teaspoons of sugar per can, and convenient packaged foods that promised nutrition while delivering dependency. Parents, believing they nourished their children, were instead feeding not only their growing bodies, but fundamentally rewiring their neural circuitry, deepening the compulsive bond between sweetness and perceived safety, between momentary pleasure and neurological reward. Children's developing brains, bathed in dopamine releases triggered by each sugar-laden treat, formed powerful associations that would dictate food preferences and emotional connections for lifetimes. The most haunting truth about sugar's conquest lies not in statistics or clinical studies, but in the subtle psychological transformation of humanity itself. While it took centuries for sugar to methodically conquer the physical body, causing cellular damage that accumulated over decades, it took far less time to quietly conquer the human mind, restructuring our very perception of satisfaction and comfort. And perhaps most disturbing of all, we may have never truly noticed the precise moment when sugar ceased being merely a substance we consumed, and instead became the master to which we answered, its silent call, directing our choices, behaviors, and desires with the invisible hand of addiction disguised as simple preference. The legacy of sugar haunts us not merely as a dietary choice, but as a devastating pandemic, silently ravaging bodies across every continent, every socioeconomic class, every demographic. In gleaming hospital corridors, pediatric endocrinologists now regularly diagnose 8-year-old children with type 2 diabetes, their small bodies already beginning to fail, their pancreases struggling against an onslaught never meant for developing organs. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, once virtually unheard of in youth, now affects nearly 40% of obese children, their livers showing damage patterns previously seen only in lifelong alcoholics. Meanwhile, exhausted parents navigate supermarket aisles transformed into psychological battlefields, where colorful packaging and cartoon characters mask products engineered by food scientists who meticulously calculate the precise bliss point of sweetness that maximizes consumption beyond natural satiety signals. The very corporations that once buried damning research now paradoxically position themselves as health advocates, their foundations funding school programs that subtly normalize their products, while their marketing departments craft deceptive wellness narratives, their reduced sugar claims, concealing alternative sweeteners that maintain the same addictive neural pathways. In government chambers where dietary guidelines are drafted, industry representatives sit alongside health experts, their influence evident in ambiguous language and generous threshold recommendations that protect profit margins rather than public wellness. The World Health Organization's attempts to establish stricter sugar limits have been repeatedly undermined through diplomatic pressure and economic threats from sugar-producing nations, revealing how deeply entrenched these interests have become in global governance. Most disturbing are the emerging neurological findings, where brain imaging studies reveal how profoundly sugar has colonized our neural architecture. Functional MRIs show identical dopaminergic pathways, lighting up whether subjects consume sugar or cocaine, the same ancient reward circuits hijacked with frightening efficiency. Researchers have documented how sugar consumption gradually dampens these pleasure responses over time, requiring ever-increasing amounts to achieve the same emotional effect, the classic tolerance pattern of addiction. Children raised on sugar-rich diets show altered stress responses and diminished ability to experience pleasure from natural reward, their neurochemistry permanently recalibrated around artificial stimulation. The psychological consequences ripple outward, manifesting in emotional eating patterns that follow us through life, comfort-seeking behaviors that turn to sweetness in moments of loneliness or anxiety, and mood disturbances that fluctuate with blood glucose levels, creating cycles of irritability, depression, and momentary euphoria tied directly to consumption patterns. This mass neurological restructuring represents perhaps the most profound, uncontrolled experiment ever conducted on human consciousness, altering not just what we eat, but how we feel, how we respond to stress, how we experience pleasure itself. And so we confront the most haunting question: if sugar has so fundamentally reshaped our brains without our conscious awareness or consent, what would liberation from its influence even feel like? How do we reclaim neural pathways we never knew were redirected? The answer begins not with moderation but with recognition, acknowledging sugar not as a treat or indulgence but as a neurological architect that has redrawn the very blueprints of our desires. Until we face this uncomfortable truth, we remain trapped in patterns we mistake for preferences, cravings we confuse with personality, habits we label as choices, while sugar continues its silent conquest, cell by cell, synapse by synapse, generation by generation. The story of sugar transcends mere agricultural history or imperial economics. It penetrates the deepest chambers of human consciousness, a silent invader methodically rewiring our most intimate neural architecture. This seemingly innocent crystalline substance became both spiritual offering and seductive manipulator, gradually transforming the very essence of our biological drives and emotional responses. Sugar's invisible influence methodically altered every dimension of human experience, from primal survival instincts to our most cherished emotional memories, until the boundaries between genuine nourishment and desperate dependency blurred beyond recognition. Consider the profound tragedy of entire generations born into a world already saturated with sugar's influence. Their brain chemistry and taste preferences shaped in utero, their emotional responses conditioned before they could form their first words, their capacity for pleasure permanently calibrated to an unnatural standard. Their emotional landscapes became inseparable from sugar's empty promises, their comfort mechanisms tethered to a substance that offers momentary relief but demands escalating consumption. Perhaps the most devastating truth lies not in the metabolic diseases sugar fuels or the scientific data it corrupts, but in the profound theft it commits within each of us daily, the systematic hijacking of authentic joy, the gradual muting of natural pleasures, the systematic dismantling of our self-regulatory systems disguised as personal preference and innocent craving. As humanity stands at the threshold of a new health awakening, confronting epidemics directly linked to this sweet saboteur, we face a question that resonates through every kitchen, every supermarket aisle, every birthday celebration, every silent battle waged in millions of minds each day. A question that cuts to the core of our autonomy as conscious beings. Are we truly consuming sugar, or has sugar been methodically consuming us?